Hey, I'm Rob Karloff, and this is Cyber News Live, where we cover the hacks and breaches that matter. Whether you're a school student, senior citizen, or a CEO, the threats are real, and we're here to help. No fluff, no fear-mongering, just straight talk. Today, we're joined by a fascinating guest and a friend of the show, Jason Bortolacchi. Did I get that right, Jason?
Bartolisi, but
Bartolisi.
close enough.
Bartolisi. All right, Jason is the director of the ProSight Financial Association, where he helps empower financial services lenders to strengthen and advance their industry. His background spans law enforcement, hands-on cyber and fraud operations inside major financial institutions, and he's also the co-founder of Red Team 27, the fraud red team experts. Jason brings a rare perspective to the intersection of fraud, cybersecurity, and financial intelligence. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. Looking forward to this chat. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, of course. It's great to have you on here. All right, let's just jump straight into the questions. And, you know, for those who may not know yet, can you briefly describe your role at ProSight Financial Association and what the ProSight Fraud Alert Network does for the industry?
Yeah, sure. So ProSight is a newer organization that is a result of a combination of two, each 100-year-old organizations. So ProSight's kind of new. We've got nearly 1,000 organizations that are in our membership and about 80,000 individual members. And we thought that ProSight is really well positioned to bring the fraud community together. So that's really what the focus of the Fraud Alert Network is. It's focused on fraud folks, you know, first, second, third line of defense, but it's an authenticated platform, so you know who you're talking to, and we just try and make that connection. So we've got a space where fraud folks can log in, connect with peers. There's a directory. That's kind of the base of it too. So a directory. Everything's built off that directory, but then you can share intelligence, insights, best practices. And then we also have all the ProSight fraud things that we do, like webinars, training, benchmarking. We're trying to pull that all into one spot. And this is all in an effort for better collaboration, faster communication in the industry, and really getting ahead of these fraud threats.
Oh, that's very, very interesting, right? Very exciting. So when executives hear the word fraud, what do they still misunderstand about the industry today?
Well, I think some of the biggest misconceptions are that fraud happens in a silo or in a vacuum. That maybe one institution is being hit with some local person writing bad checks, or maybe conducting some account takeovers or scams. But really, it's the threat actors are organized and coordinated, and they share information. It's billions in losses every year. So it's not just a small problem for every little bank. It's really the same threat actors targeting these different banks.
Okay, cool. How do you define fraud and cyber fraud in 2026? And why does that definition matter?
Yes, it's a great question. I was thinking about this on the way down. Traditionally, fraud just involves some kind of deception for monetary gain. You've got like old school check kiting or check fraud or counterfeiting. That's still there. That's still prevalent. But, cyber, I would argue that cyber is almost always the predicate for some kind of fraud. It kind of leads into it. A cyber event could be a breach, some kind of meaningful intrusion. But once that turns into some sort of monetary gain or monetary exploitation, it kind of transitions into more of a fraud. But again, I would argue that almost all of your fraud cases have some kind of cyber hook, cyber predicate. I can tell you when I used to work with NCFTA, it's a big fusion center in Pittsburgh, really great organization. We've got law enforcement, federal law enforcement, international, and most of your major banks. I was assigned there to investigate just old-fashioned credit card fraud, but I started to see that cyber was the predicate to almost all of my cases. It was a data breach. It was some kind of, organized ID theft, something like that with like a technical hook to it. But it all led into some kind of fraud event. And that's why I kind of switched my career up. Instead of just fraud, I kind of got into the cyber stuff.
Yeah, it's a pretty good segue into the next question. And at what point does a cyber incident stop becoming just cyber and becomes a cyber fraud event?
Yeah, I think it's as soon as money movement occurs. So if you look at a bank, banks are pretty fortified digitally. It's pretty hard to hack into a bank these days. Nation states can do it. Maybe very sophisticated actors can actually hack into a bank, but they can social engineer the call center. They can use data from some kind of other event. But once you get into that account and control a bank account, for example, and start moving money, it moves from some kind of intrusion or breach to money movement and fraud.
Okay. That's pretty crazy, right? What's the biggest shift you've seen in how fraud is executed over the last few years?
So I've been doing this for a little while. Again, investigated old school check fraud and ID theft and account takeovers, but most of the targets were the banks themselves. Threat actors were targeting some kind of system or control within the bank. They're trying to get their hands on plastic. They're counterfeiting checks. But what's really interesting is in the last year especially, I'm not saying they weren't doing this before, but I'm just seeing an uptick in it. The fraud threat actors are targeting the victims themselves, meaning the account holders. So instead of trying to get information through the bank or through the call center at the bank, they're contacting victims, account holders within that bank. They're spoofing the bank's phone numbers. They're convincing that victim, who's now the primary target, hey, I'm from the bank, you need to give me your one-time passcode, or you need to give me your credentials because we're trying to protect your account or something like that. So I think that's a really new shift. And I talked to a lot of folks in the industry, almost everybody I'm talking to, especially credit unions, mid-sized banks, that $1 to $40 billion asset-sized bank, all their customers are getting hit with this tactic. It just kind of shifted a little bit, and it's very effective. It's a really effective way to scan the bank.
Where does that burden lie? Would it be with the customers, the institutions, or the threat actors? It's a very funny hypothetical.
Yeah, so this is a great question too. I'm super glad you brought this up because a lot of banks take the position that, well, your account holder gave up that information, so that's not on the bank. They're still victims though, and yeah, they did give up their one-time passcode, which is still widely used. Sometimes they give out like knowledge-based authentication, but it really depends on the bank. If you ask a victim, they think it's on the bank. If you ask the bank, they think it probably should be on the victim. It probably lies somewhere in between. But right now, I don't think there's very clear guidelines on who bears that risk.
Why has identity become the prime attack service for modern fraud?
Yeah, another great question. Everything's digital right now. That identity, that's the keys to the kingdom right there. If you have someone's identity, you can open up an account. If you can mimic somebody's identity, which means you're facilitating some kind of account takeover, social engineering. Again, you gain control of that account. So it's and there's a little bit of authentication with that too. So I'd argue it's identity and authentication. Can you prove who you are as an account holder? Can the bank prove who you are? And are they going to let you move money or access the account? Just kind of two things on the same coin: identity and authentication. Once that's breached, or once the threat actors figure out how to beat or bypass a control, they have free reign of the bank account. Easy to move money out, easy to open up new accounts, trade lines, pivot. It's really fascinating how they figured out how banks work, sometimes better than the banks themselves.
What's the minimum information that these guys are collecting? Is it social security number, birth certificate, an email, maybe a phone number? To me, there's not much information needed to really start this full process.
Yeah, it's not a lot. And if you look at opening up a bank account right now, you do it with your phone. You don't have to show up at the bank anymore. So yeah, if they want to steal an identity, name, date of birth, TIN, SOCH, they can create a document that kind of looks maybe like you. They can beat a lot in this test because they're going to make that ID look like the threat actor themselves. It's really fascinating how they'll kind of pivot. And one thing I think is important too, so they can cobble together your identity with maybe a fictitious name. They create synthetic identities. So that's a whole nother way for them to control that whole account lifecycle, from account opening to access to maintenance, money movement, because now they kind of created a fictitious person. I think what's a really important distinction between those two is in ID theft, so if I steal your identity, open an account, you're probably going to know. You're going to get some kind of alert. But if I use maybe your SOCH, my name, my colleague's address, apply for credit. That creates a new little sub-profile, credit profile with the bureaus, something totally new. Now, I apply for credit as a bad guy. I'm using your SOCH, but a different name. You may never know because you're not going to complain about it. And it's not the same thing as an account takeover because you keep an eye on your accounts. This is something totally new. So these guys will they'll control the entire life cycle of that account. And then when they're getting ready to just completely bust out all that trade lines, they just disappear. And it looks like a bad debt. It looks like a credit write-off.
Yeah, extremely hard to defend against, I bet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can't tell because it looks like a legit customer.
Yep. All right, cool. Where do organizations struggle the most when fraud, cybersecurity, and risk teams don't align?
Yeah, so we see this a lot. I think, this alignment or misalignment that occurs prevalently in the industry, it's just missed opportunities. You've got a cyber background. The cyber folks, the SOC, depending on the organization, they have a lot of signals that they're tracking. They might not be looking at it from a fraud lens. And same thing with fraud. They might not be able to look at it from a cyber kind of lens. But when you work together, it's just better data, enriched data, working together to collaborate to get ahead of these fraud threats. It's one of the things that we want to do with the Fraud Alert Network is connect some folks between, frontline fraud investigators, maybe SOC analysts, threat intel folks. But it really takes that collaboration to get ahead of these fraud threats, not miss opportunities, lower losses. But remember too, there's a person behind all these accounts too. So you've got better customer experience. I mean, we go off on a lot of different tangents just on that one question.
All right, what are the warning signs that an institution's fraud program is falling behind reality?
Yeah, another great question. Dollar losses increasing is probably a telltale sign or a big red flag. Same types of fraud occurring over and over.
But sometimes it's not making that threshold within the organization, so they just write it off.
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, and so you bring up a really important distinction too. A lot of your fraud shops with banks, it's really difficult to categorize a fraud loss. You've got just outright fraud and ID theft, pretty easy to calculate. You've got first-party fraud where, legit card holder, account holder claims that they didn't make a purchase when they did, so that's first-party fraud. You've got the synthetic part too that looks maybe like a bad charge-off or bad credit. They're not communicating with the industry for a best practice on how do we collate or how do we calculate our fraud losses? What's a good fraud rate? So there's no industry standard either. Again, that's why everybody needs to kind of come together, get on the same page, share data, and you can benchmark things based on it too if you're marking the same kind of data.
Yeah. So these fraud patterns tend to repeat across institutions. Why does it keep on happening? Barriers to entry, low cost, laziness.
It's a lot of that. I think, again, going back to what we talked about, some of the challenges, the fraud folks might operate in a silo. They're not talking to other groups within their institution or outside the institution too. I think, they're not being proactive enough at looking at really good fraud threat intelligence. So taking that playbook right out of cyber threat intel, lessons learned, here's what happened, here's what we can make things better. They're just not really taking that approach as well as the cyber folks do. And when they're not looking at that data and doing like a look back or, again, like a lessons learned or even tabletops, they're falling for the same kind of fraud tactics time and time again. Plus, it's just the volume too. Everybody's getting hit with so much fraud. If you look at Internet crime complaint data, 2024 report is most recent. 2025 isn't out yet. Again, it's really hard to aggregate these stats because everyone's reporting fraud in a different way, and some people don't even report fraud if they're a victim because there's some stigma. So that's a whole other thing. But the only indicator you can see is it's going up. So it was a 33% increase from 23 to 24. And that's just one agency that's collecting data. You've got FTC data, you've got FinCEN data. I think the only thing you can take away is it's still climbing. It's a pretty good indicator that what we're doing is not working.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that J curve. It's
sure.
Unbelievable. All right, so how does the shared intelligence, like what ProSight facilitates, change outcomes in real terms?
It's just getting ahead of fraud threats. It's mitigating fraud before it happens. I mean, you brought up this great point before, like, why does this keep happening? I think, you've got 9,000 depository institutions across the U.S. There's little mom and pop shop businesses that are dealing with a really small credit union. They don't really have the resources to be able to share with their clients or their account holders. But when you connect them to like some of the bigger banks or more mature fraud operations, folks that are better in tune with their cyber folks and threat intel, they start sharing that data. Then you can start making an impact. And that's really what we're trying to do with the Fraud Alert Network. We're just being that connector to get people together. We're sending some of our own data out there. We curate articles. We've got a research team. But the real power in that is getting the community, meaning all these different banking organizations, credit unions, even fintechs, sharing information, getting ahead of these fraud threats, and then maybe that J curve that we were talking about with all the fraud, maybe we can start seeing it come down a little bit. I think that'd be the end goal.
All right, that leads on to the next question with AI. How is AI changing the speed, scale, realism of fraud attacks right now? And are you using AI to defend against it?
Yeah, no, awesome question. I was just on a webinar yesterday and this came up. So, maybe surprise some folks. I'm not in my 20s. I've been around for a little while, right? Early in my career, you'd see people forging documents, making documents. You have to go buy a fake ID. You can still do that, of course, but now you can create that on your desktop or with some kind of app or fraud as a service group. You can make documents, identification, really quick. I mean, within seconds. So AI is changing that game. I think on the flip side for defenses, it's probably still lacking. There's definitely some investment with financial services in AI. I don't think there's probably enough on the fraud side. I don't think that AI can completely replace investigators or folks that are eyes on glass, looking at trends. You still need those folks to be able to use judgment and really put the pieces together. But I see it being a great opportunity for a research tool. If you can aggregate a lot of data as an investigator, again, create some really good threat intel, share that, collaborate, get ahead of threats. And then you can also look at AI as being, a tool that can get rid of a lot of the noise too. So your fraud investigator, average fraud investigator, they might be getting hundreds of alerts every day. They're trying to comb through all this. Same with the SOC analyst, same with the cyber stuff. But maybe they can kind of get rid of some of that noise, focus on the high value signals and intel. But we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. I'm really interested to see what the industry does in response to all the fraud in AI. But as we all know, the threat actors, bad guys, are always maybe one or two steps ahead of us, and we're always playing catch up.
It's very exciting how the bad actors can pivot at a moment where the good guys, it takes a lot of time for us to,
well, they don't have regulations, they don't have committees, they don't have to report. They just want to do something, they do it.
It's
really
fascinating.
Quick.
It's going to be scary where it's going to be another 5 years compared to like 6 months.
Yeah.
All right. So what should financial service leaders be doing today to avoid being reactive 6 or 12 months from now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things they can do. First of all, I can't state this enough. Make those connections. It can be through ProSight, through the Fraud Alert Network. It can be, on their own. Really have to collaborate, coordinate efforts, share intelligence. I think what else is really important is taking another playbook from cyber. Cyber does tabletops. They run red team tests. These are all opportunities that fraud shops can do. They might have a tool in place to prevent account takeover. Do they know that it's actually working? Have they tried it? Is it tried in a live environment? Those are all the things I would be doing. Just be as proactive as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's that self-education, making sure you understand what's happening out there in the industry.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. If you could leave leaders with one mindset shift about fraud going into the future, what would it be?
Don't go it alone. Keep sharing information, keep collaborating. Don't think that it's just your institution or another institution or your account holders. Everybody's experiencing this. So you might as well come together as a group, as a community, and really start to make an impact on all this fraud. And again, going back to that J curve on the graphs that we all see with IC3 data, it'd be really nice to see those at least level off. You know, every year there's more and more. At least let's see it curtail a little bit too. But yeah, that collaboration and information sharing is key.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you for joining us today. And before you go, I did want to present you with Cyber News Live
Very cool.
cap here.
I love it.
Nice little polo to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.